Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Madhu Mandela Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. And today is Wednesday, October the 14th, and we have a very, very special guest with us, Dr. Karanja Keita Carroll, who's a social theorist and Africologist. And we are going to talk about an array of things in a moment when we return. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining this conversation today. I know y'all miss me. I haven't had a show in about a week or so, and want to keep the information flowing. And I just want to thank you all, those of you who are listening live, and then those of you who are catching the archives. For tuning in to the show. And as always, I want to start off with some announcements. And so a major announcement is the changing, or I should say the giving of the name to the show. So, for those of you who go back to the Blog Talk Radio days, my show was called Simba Simbi. And when I started doing the YouTube, a few years later, I never really named the show. It's just kind of informally been conversations with Brother Asar. Well, I decided to name the show. And of course, in traditional asarimhotep fashion, I like to take concepts from the African continent, and especially amongst the Bantu people who I have a special affinity for and love. So doing our Sankofa, our Aluja, going into the Congo and creating our own online digital Mbongi. And for those who are not familiar with what an Mbongi is, it is a learning center. It is known by different names in Central Africa, like Boka and Mbongi, and a host of other names. But it represents an institution that is located in the center of a village where, elders come and discuss issues pertaining to the community, and where they hash out things. And it's also a learning center where young folks come to learn from the elders about, just everything about life, whether it's, dealing with pharmacology, or, just the political institutes, expectations between, individuals who live in the community, and the like, so a whole host of things, a whole host of knowledge is exchanged and shared in an Mbongi. So, I'll have to do a show in the future so I can break down the logo for it, which is related to Bantu cosmology, which of course I've been dealing with and studying for about 20 years now. And the phrase at the top is actually from the Amazulu people. It's Muntu, Gumuntu, Mbantu, which means the person is human because of other people. And it is a it is kind of a way to say that, I am because we are, therefore I am. But it's the underlying idea is that one's humanity is developed, in community, and in a community, in a society that is human centered itself. So human beings create other human beings and develop other human beings. So that's what we intend to do, and that's what we do on this program here now, called the Mbongi, with Brother Asar and different guests. So all my other shows have names, but this one doesn't. So when you see this logo, you know that this is me. And we have some upcoming guests uh, on this Friday at, what is it going to be? I think it's going to be the same time, 7 p.m. on Friday. We're going to have with us Dr. Jean-Philippe Gourdin, who's a glycobiologist. And, he studies genetics and biodomes, data. It is Black Science Month for us. And so we want to highlight a number of Black African scientists and mathematicians. And, this is one, and I haven't done the flyer yet, but we also have a statistician who's going to join us on Sunday. So we're going to get our math on, but we're going to get our biology on this Friday. What's that date? The 16th at 7 p.m. And I don't have the flyer here, but on Thursday, I will, continue my Big Mad series. And so, I will be doing a lecture, why, I can't rock with the Bible. And so that's going to be earlier in the day, probably like 1 or 2 o'clock, something like that, Eastern time. That's going to be on tomorrow. So again, the Big Mad series. And at the end of this month, on the 29th, we have Baba Wade Nobles, who's going to join us again on the Mbongi. And so we had him on the show, him and Dr. Adisa Ajamu. Now it's going to be him by himself, and he is going to enlighten us on a variety of different topics pertaining to, the human condition through an African-centered lens, especially in the realms of psychology and how to navigate this space, how to use the tools of Black psychology to navigate the space that we are currently in. So, and lastly, I want to thank everyone who has been joining our Patreon page. And so, for those who don't know, I do have a Patreon page. It's patreon.com/asarimhotep. You can help to support the movement of this channel, as well as the upcoming film titled Chiena Into, where I will be discussing the relationship between the ancient Nile Valley, ancient Egypt in particular, and modern Bantu cultures, religion, philosophy, and rituals and the like. And so if you want to make a contribution, this is one way in which you can do it, or you can visit my website at asarimhotep.com. And so I want to thank everyone who has made themselves known in the chat. So let me acknowledge you all. Peace to Tamika, Jagad Davis, Don Williams, Samba Sek, Ernest Godfrey, Duarte Odara, all the way in Brazil, Brother Shabazz, Pure Black, Phi Light and Tis, Brother Jehuti Ma'at, Thought Evoca, and I think, and Anusha Hardiman. I see Ital, Iman. Thank you all for joining and making your presence known in the chat room. So, there will be a question and answer period. So for those of you who have a question for our guest, please make sure that you type it into the chat, and I will ask our guest that question. So speaking of our guest, without further ado, I want to introduce you all to Dr. Karanja Keita Carroll, who is currently an independent scholar and adjunct professor of Africana-Studies at Baruch College and the County College of Morris in New Jersey. From 2006 to 2015, he taught at the State University of New York at New Paltz in the Department of Black Studies as an associate professor of Africana Black Studies. Since 2000, Dr. Carroll has provided a variety of education, pedagogy, and social justice workshops throughout New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. He has also taught inside a variety of correctional institutions, including the SCI Chester, SCI Gratford, Brookwood Juvenile Facility, and a host of other such facilities. And hopefully we'll get some commentary on that work as well. His teaching and research interests revolve around African-centered theory, methodology with an emphasis on social, psychological theory. He has a number of publications and, a resume that will take half the show to read and or whatnot. So without further ado, I want to welcome to the Mbongi, the first guest of the official Mbongi, Dr. Karanja Keita Carroll. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm well.
All right.
Want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to converse with myself and my audience about your areas of expertise and the like. And you're the kind of person that more of us in the community, who aren't academics, really need to know and understand, and in many respects mirror your work. And so I want to get to that, the conversations around the jail and juvenile things and the political prisoners, a little later. But before we get there, can you, tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? Your education, and what motivated you to go into the direction in which you are currently, as far as your studies and your teachings.
So, it's a somewhat of a twisty, turning type movement that got me to where I am right now. I'm originally from New Jersey. I did my undergraduate at Montclair State University in New Jersey, where I studied psychology, history, and literature. I then went on to Temple University, where I received my master's and PhD in African American Studies. And as the bio stated, after finishing my graduate work, I began teaching at SUNY New Paltz. And after leaving SUNY New Paltz, I came back to Jersey, and that was when my research kind of began to move in a direction as to where I'm at right now. My previous work, and I think what a lot of people know me around, is connected to the work around the African worldview. I was really inspired by the work of Dawdi Ajani Azibo when I was in graduate school, and I used a lot of his work in order to guide and direct the stuff that I was doing when I first got out of graduate school. Now I'm trying to move my work more in a direction around prison justice, a direction around political prisoners. But it's interesting because I just finished working on a piece with my good friend Sekhmet Ma'at around African epistemologies, which really brought me back to the old work that I was doing. It felt good to be back in that body of literature. But I also know that there's a lot of work around political prisoners that I want to bring forward, especially to this generation of folks who need to be mindful of the freedoms that we have and how they're connected to the sacrifices that certain people have made and that are still locked up for.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. You mentioned your studies and outlook on worldview, and I want to know, like, how what is, when we talk about worldview, what does that encompass?
Mm-hmm.
And then why is that important for the understanding of African people in general?
Mm-hmm.
But more so, what is your take on the difference or the perceived difference in discrepancy between Europeans and how that clash gives us moments in history?
Okay. So I'm informed by, number one, the work of Vernon Dixon. Vernon Dixon was an economist, trained at Princeton, but he was the one who opened up the floodgates for any type of discussion of worldview that was taking place within Black study circles. So a worldview is simply how we look at the world. A worldview is how we make sense of the world, but a worldview also consists of a set of philosophical assumptions. And those philosophical assumptions revolve around questions of cosmology, ontology, axiology, and epistemology. These concepts are foundational to discussions of worldview within African-centered circles, more specifically within African-centered psychology. There was a conference that took place at the Frantz Fanon Center that Vernon Dixon was at. At that same conference, you had Baba Wade Nobles, I believe Akbar was there, and other Black psychologists. And that is when we have this discussion of worldview taking place in economics, moving into psychology, and from it being moved within Black psychology, it then comes into Black studies. I would argue specifically through the work of Dowdy Azibo, because there's that genealogy that connects the movement of ideas. For me, genealogy is so important because we talk about things, but we need to talk about how we got to this point. So I needed to be clear on how we got to worldview within Black studies, within African-centered circles. So when we talk about a worldview broadly, I'm not going to go through all the components of the framework, but the cosmology, okay, coming from the Greek cosmos, universe, the nature and structure of the universe, and African cosmology argues that everything within the universe is interrelated and interconnected. All right, this notion of oneness is extremely important. Now, we know that there are a variety of worldviews. All right, there's Asian worldviews, Native American worldviews, so forth and so on. But the European worldview is the one that is most diametrically opposing to the existence of all of humanity. And that worldview is rooted in a cosmology that is grounded in notions of independence and notions of separation. And, when you follow the work of Baba Kobe Cambone, you know that there's this conflict when you have a particular group of people who have a worldview system that's based upon community and connection, and another group of people who have a worldview system that's based upon competition and individualism. There's that conflict. And arguably, I would state that issues of racism, sexism, heterosexism all revolve around a European worldview in relation to other ways of seeing and being within the world that we live in.
It reminds me of I'm not sure if you're familiar with this author, Jordan Ngubani. He's a South African author. He passed, I want to say, in the 80s, but in 1979 he wrote a text, Conflict of Minds. And the whole text is about the difference between what he calls the Sudanic, basically, worldview, and the European. And what he argued, essentially what you're just saying, is that ultimately it is a conflict of minds for why we have these issues here. And so he goes through the whole, Zulu cosmology. He even compares it with the ancient Egyptian cosmology and showing the synthesis, or the congruence between those two particular systems, and how their cosmology informs, how they order their society, and it reflects that. And then, of course he contrasts this with the European, but that is the basis of the entire text, and it's one that I reference all the time. It's kind of hard to find now, but I think it would be I think you'll draw a lot, what I'm saying.
It sounds like I would. Dorian Mbuni?
Ngubani.
Ngubani.
Yeah, okay. I think it's Ngubani.
I pulled it up.
Yeah, all right.
Yep. So yeah. It's going to be on my list.
Yeah, and to me, and like what impresses me about that text is like he just has that indigenous African language, even though he's speaking English. The way that he's using language to frame the issues is like it's coming from the inside.
Okay.
And you'll find some indigenous terms to kind of view these different realities. But speaking, like one of our possible subjects to discuss tonight was this hype over the anti-racism, and I want to kind of link this sense of worldview and that notion. So you're starting to see a lot of commentary, or at least I am, in the social media sphere, and they're using, it's almost a buzzword now, anti-racism. But can you explain what that is, and your opinions on if it's overhyped or not?
I mean, I think I'm not going to give you a definition of what anti-racism is, because I won't go there. But what I will say is that it seems as if this moment that we are in, there is a lot of discussion around this idea of anti-racism, which I don't even think is clearly defined. And I would make the argument that the buzz seems popular at the moment, but the fact that it is popular does not mean that it is substantive, and it does not mean that it's going to get at the fundamental core that is connected to the European worldview, that is connected to issues of race and racism within the society. What we're going to have is a lot of people talking about racism, but they're not going to get to anything of any substance. So we're going to, one of the pieces, a piece I wrote a few years ago dealt with like how we are not post-racist in the moment of Obama's presidency, because what happens is we get a lot of black faces in high places, and that doesn't get to the core. The core of the thinking still is reflective of this European orientation. So we put a black face up and we think that that's change. And the majority of us, the folks who are on this, probably recognize that if there is not substantive change, it don't matter what the face looks like. And I would argue that's the issue with a lot of this discussion around anti-racism, because we're not really trying to deal with structural change. We're trying to deal with throwing a little bit of color here and there. And the color here and there is not going to be substantive.
Just more recently, the Breonna Taylor case is just the latest example of not having it seems like we lost our guest, and I'll just wait to make my comment until he comes back on. And There he
I
is.
don't know what happened. My bad on that.
It's all good. It's all good.
But sorry, you Breonna Taylor case?
Yeah, I was just saying that's the latest example of how you can have an individual with the phenotype of a black person, but not necessarily have the worldview to know what the care and concern is and how to, approach this situation, but more so specifically to your point of the structural change. So you can have someone in that position, but if the structure, the way that it's designed in the first place is not adjusted, it's just you
filling in a space
yeah.
and doing a job that is connected to that position. We're not thinking about we're not rethinking positions. We're thinking about putting people in places. And it's and again, that's my critique of a lot of anti-racism work, but a lot of the work that even takes place within other spaces beyond because a lot of the anti-racism work, I think, is taking place at the K through 12 level. I taught a variety of students over the last 20 years that I've been teaching, and a lot of them are public school teachers, and they've talked about how there is a lot of discussion around anti-racism, but it is not substantive. They're not looking at curricular changes. They're looking at, oh, well, maybe if we hire this black teacher and we, add a little bit of more information during Black History Month, we're going to make change. No, it's about saying, let's look at this public school curriculum. Let's look at the contributions of African people. Let's look at the contributions of Latinos, Asians, and other people of color in order to rethink this whole process. Hold up, let's rethink the whole classroom. Let's rethink how we sit in the classroom. Let's rethink the role of the teacher within the classroom. Let's rethink the structure of these schools. No one is doing that. What they're doing is just dropping little things into a structure that's already jacked up. The current educational system, at least at the K through 12 level, is based on a system of education that goes back to the early 1900s. People sit in rows in classes for a particular reason. All these things we're not thinking about, and we're not changing. At least we're not changing them at the rate that we should be changing them, and it just explains the condition that we're
in. It reminds me that, well, I don't like to talk about racism too much. Not that it is not important, but to me, it's less important than the development of power. And I'm not one to attach myself to names, like when people say you're a Marxist or you're a whatever. But if I was to do such a thing, I would be what I would call a Wilsonian man, an Amos Wilson type person, because to me it's just like for those who take martial arts, if somebody is attacking you, why they're attacking you and for what reasons are irrelevant. You just have to have the know-how and the strength to be able to fend off their attacks. And you have to understand where your power comes from in terms of your punches and your legs. You develop the development of power reduces someone else's ability to harm you. And I think too much conversation, at least too much mainstream conversation is focused on trying to change the heart and minds of European people instead of us talking about the development of power and doing exactly what you do. You reimagining, how everything is done and us being able to accumulate certain resources so that we can execute, our own vision. And I think what you just said is congruent, at least in my thoughts, in the direction that we should be going.
By researching and studying the work of African-centered psychologists and being informed by the work of Dr. John Henrik Clarke, we have to understand white folks and their stuff. But all too many times, like, we stay there and we don't deal with our own unique way of seeing and being within the world. And when we begin to do that, it's less of a reaction. And again, talking to my good friend Sekhmet recently, I was saying that, like, a lot of my previous work was very comparative, comparing this European, this African. And the work that I'm trying to do now is, we don't need to compare. We need to be rooted in who we are as African people and use that as our point of departure when we start making the arguments. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important.
Exactly. So along with that, how we was talking about the new African independence movement.
Yes.
And so is this drawn out of what you just said in terms of us, not necessarily doing a comparative, but what do we mean when we say like a new African and moving forward off of that paradigm?
So when we use the concept of new African, we're referring to African descendant people who are in this hemisphere that were forcefully brought here, and the descendants of those that were forcefully brought here. When we talk about a new African independence movement, we're talking about the arguments that revolve around the Republic of New Africa, the creation and maintenance of an independent Black nation within the empire that we live in right now. It was a 5-state solution that came out in the late 60s. And those ideas have continued. And those ideas continue with the provisional government of New Africa. Excuse me, the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa. Those ideas continue with organizations such as the Malcolm X grassroots movement. And it's the idea of recognizing that new African people are a colonized people. And if we are a colonized people, we should be able to, number one, be independent and make a decision about our relationship to the American nation state. And what we don't really deal with is the fact that we look at the 13th Amendment, it ended the enslavement of African people. The 14th Amendment said that folks were citizens. No one ever asked us if we wanted to be a part of this nation. And we need to be at the point where we as African people, new African people, can make that decision. Because there's a group of us that would like to be independent from this empire that we are forced to be in right now.
It reminds me of, again, going back to Jordan Ngubani, the phrase that he would use when talking about white people in a situation like this is the prescribing destiny. Like they have this habit of wanting to prescribe destiny on, other people. So even at the time of our alleged freedom, we didn't even have a say in how that was going to play out. They just told us, what was going to happen, where now you're going to be incorporated, da 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 da. We weren't at the negotiating table, nothing to that nature. And so,
last night I happened to be on a call with some elders who were connected to, who are connected to the new African Independence Movement, and one of the elders there said we need to look into this Port Royal Agreement, and the Port Royal Agreement, I believe, came out of South Carolina or Georgia, and they asked the folks. This is right when slavery was ending, Civil War. They asked the folks, "What do you want?" And the number one thing that people said that they wanted was land. Okay, they wanted land to make their decision about how they are going to exist in relation to their former enslavers. And that's not, we've never had that decision to be made. And the new African Independence Movement is concerned with putting those questions on the table and having us think about what are the possibilities of independence.
Now I ask you this because now, I would love to see an independent, African nation here in the United States. But what about on the continent? Has there been any conversations about possibly, creating a state, or at least at minimum, a city that, you know, in some place in Africa where, you know, those of us who are African minded and want to move there and start our own and have our own government, if that would be, you know, is that a goal? Is that seen as something feasible? How does that idea play into the new
again? That's a decision that we as a people need to make. You know, like, I think in theory, yes, that could be an option, but we need to think about the time that we put into building this nation. And then the question is, do we want to leave, or do we want to stay here and rebuild what we've put in here? But again, like I said, that's a decision that we need to make as a people. Like, we need to make that decision. We need to have that conversation. And we're not having those conversations because what we're thinking about is, well, how can we make this place better for us, you know, so that we can just be integrated and not have to deal with, you know, racism. That's all of our solutions are concerned with us fitting into circle people, fitting into a square peg. It ain't going to work, and it hasn't worked.
Now, I can already hear some people saying, well, who are these people that, you know, would negotiate on behalf of African American people if such conversations were to have? You know, like, is there you know, a provincial government already established with processes and voting and, you know, this, that, you know, we would recognize, you know, for that? Because it's like, you know, they may go get Al Sharpton, you know, or somebody.
As it relates to the PG, yes, there is a provisional government that's in existence. There have elections. There are people who represent and do that work. But again, that is for the people. That's for us as new Africans to decide. I'm not in the interest of having someone make decisions for me unless I have the ability to put them in that position to do that. So it's a decision that we need to make as a community, saying, what are we going to do? All right. And then after we make that decision, we then have to determine who's going to represent us. And then as we figure out who's going to represent us, then we figure out what are the next steps. So what I'm talking about is the potential, but we're not even thinking about this. That like, part of my, you know, concern and frustration is that the options that we're given, this is not even on the table. How many of us talk about seriously trying to be independent from the United States as it relates to a potential 5-state solution? The majority of folks ain't talking about that. We're sitting here trying to figure out how to integrate.
Well, I would assume, and I'll take that to segue into this. You know, there would have to be an aspect of our educational process that plants these seeds.
That's right.
So, you know, as far as the current state of Africana-Studies, you know, how do you see this integrated? You know, are there spaces in Africana-Studies where this type of thinking is being taught and implanted? And so they have context, and so this will be on the minds. And then, of course, you know, if we have our own K through 12 education, we can get them a little bit earlier. But right, if we don't have that conversation at these, you know, early stages, then a lot of us, you know, won't be having it, you know, later on when we get into you know, positions of power or wealth where we can, you know, contribute in a major way.
So I'm gonna answer that, but I'm also gonna suggest that people pick up this book. It's entitled "Free the Land." The subtitle is "The Republic of New Africa and the Pursuit of a Black Nation State," written by my comrade and brother Edward Anochi. And he's a professor, you know, doing this work and scholarship around the history of the Republic of New Africa. So when you ask me, Are there academic spaces within higher education where these conversations are taking place? Yes. I think we need more spaces. I think that we need to be mindful that Africana-Studies can be a whole bunch of things. You know, I'm influenced and mentored by, you know, the good brother Greg Carr, and he talks about, like, you know, how when some people think of Black studies and Africana-Studies, they're concerned with, you know, the study of Black things. And when we talk about Africana-Studies, we're really concerned with what is the epistemological basis for us to understand the existence of Black people. So we have a body of folks who want to study Black folks, but there's another group of us who are saying, how do we make sense of understanding that study? How do we make sense of that process? And the folks who are dealing with epistemological questions are the ones, I would argue, who are also asking questions beyond what's the norm. And as we go beyond that, that's how we can think about, well, do we need to even be in this state, in this nation, the way that we are? Africana-Studies, its history being rooted in the demands made by students in the late 1960s has gone through many different changes. But by being placed within higher education, by being placed within institutions that are guided by a Eurocentric perspective, many aspects of Africana-Studies have been watered down. And as it becomes watered down, its ideological, its political, its radical roots are lost. But those ideological, political, and radical roots are the ones that are going to lead us to thinking, maybe this Republic of New Africa idea might be worthwhile, okay? And maybe we just need to have a space where this stuff can be introduced. So in my classes, I teach a Black political thought class every couple of years. Of course, I'm going to talk about the Republic of New Africa. I know folks who teach at a variety of schools throughout the empire, and they put this stuff in there. But the idea is that it's possible. We just have to actually do it, and we need to rethink how we understand Black studies. Like too many folks doing Black studies are teaching in Black studies, and this is my honest to God truth, like teaching in Black studies because they can't teach no place else. I've seen it for myself. People are trained within traditional disciplines, and they just happen to fall in Black studies. And when we ask them, how is your work connected to the historical, political, social development of the discipline, they can't answer that. My graduate mentor at Temple University, Dr. Nathaniel Norman, said, whenever we do our work, how does this advance Africana-Studies? That's the fundamental question that we have to ask. And if we're not asking that question, we just studying Black things. And you could do that in history, sociology, psychology, wherever. But what we do in Black studies needs to be something different.
That's something that I've really noticed. You know, when I engage scholars who have come out of the Temple School and affiliates versus some other entryways into, you know, the Black studies, as you said, is that there is at least at minimum a care concern for the discipline of Africology. And I see that a lot in the literature. When I go to conferences, there's always this care and concern for, you know, how can we in these areas be more rigorous, and, you know, how can we advance the field in this way? Like there's, you know, like there's this underlying futuristic concern, like, you know, like we want this to be a valid discipline, so you know, we can separate ourselves from those who just want to study Black things, you know, put Black on it. There was a Black king somewhere in Europe at one time, you know. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that's connected to the history of Temple. Temple's the first PhD program in African American studies in Africology. And part of the training that we had was to always think about and not forget the discipline. And it's just the question that we gotta we have to deal with. It's funny when I teach when I've taught intro to Black Studies and intro to Africana-Studies, I would deal with students who should be able to define what the discipline is, but they couldn't. But I asked them, well, are you a psychology major, sociology major? And they'd be able to drop that definition like that. Like, if you are in this discipline, you need to be able to define that thing at the drop of a dime. Somebody's going to ask you what's your major, and you need to be able to define it. And I just think that that's a part of what we were trained to be concerned with coming out of Temple. And I also just think that, like, when you understand how Black Studies came into these institutions, it's not like these institutions were like saying, we want you here. We were demanding for space, which means that we demanded to be here, and we're going to need to demand to stay here, which means that it's going to be a rigorous struggle. A lot of the talk around, quote unquote, decolonizing curriculum, some people think that it's a threat to Africana-Studies. But the reality is that Africana-Studies came into these institutions to decolonize the curriculum. And the fact that we're still talking about it today means that the work of Africana-Studies is not done. We're still here. We're still necessary in order to do this work.
One of the major tenets of Africology is that the work must be connected to the struggle in the community and advancing the conditions for African people worldwide. And so within that, how do you see, or it's a silly question to ask, but how is your work dealing with the prisons informed by that connection in Africana-Studies?
So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So now, I'll in order to answer that, we need a whole bunch of context. I'm gonna try to give you the truncated version of the history. When I started I think the PhD program at Temple, we got a letter to the department from the State Correctional Institution at Chester saying that there was a program there, and they wanted to know if there were some professors who wanted to teach and do some workshops at this minimum security prison. And for me, in my mind, I said, the history of Black Studies is about bringing the campus to the community. And if a significant component of our community is incarcerated, that's where we need to be. That is where we need to be doing work inside correctional facilities. That was in, I guess, 2001. And from 2001 until about 2016 or 17, I've done classes, workshops, and a whole bunch of educational projects within minimum security, maximum security, and juvenile facilities from Pennsylvania to New York. And that's how I see making the connection. When I was teaching at SUNY New Paltz, I was doing work with a program known as the African Cultural Awareness Program, which was run out of the Shawangunk Correctional Facility, which is a maximum security prison, probably 10 minutes from that campus. And while I was there doing that work, I was also doing research on the side. And as I was doing research on the side, I came by the name of someone by the name of Jalil Muntakim. And Jalil Muntakim had received, I believe, a bachelor's and a master's through SUNY New Paltz when they allowed for folks who were locked up to gain educational degrees. And when I learned who Baba Jalil was, that's what got me into that political prisoner work. And I'm happy to say that as of October 7th, Baba Jalil is free. He is no longer locked up in the in the New York quote unquote systems of correction. But that long history is is reflective of my committed to, number one, prison education. Like, I tell my students now that I love teaching inside correctional facilities because those brothers in there are serious about their work. I had a chance to teach a class at Sullivan Correctional. This had to have been maybe 2016, 2017. It was African American history class, and it was an amazing experience. It's actually at that over that course of that semester where I met Baba Robert Seth Hayes, who was a political prisoner. He was released, and he recently passed December of last year. But I met him. He actually told the brothers who were in the class that he wanted to come down to the class for one day so that we could teach together. It was an amazing experience to teach with this brother who was a former Panther, who had experienced the stuff that I'm sitting here teaching about. So all of that stuff is connected to how I see making the connection from the campus to our community and where the members of our community are at.
It reminds me, going back to the curriculum, of Africana-Studies. In my opinion, a large portion of it should be geared towards, I see like Africana-Studies as a way like in martial arts to teach you how to fight and to prepare for it. It should, in my opinion, be preparing you to do this type of work and the expectations of, the society at large and what we need to do in these spaces. I remember a sister, I forgot her name, but I was asked to come and lecture at Arizona State University. This was some years back. And so this was a woman who deals with, doing film and all this other kind of stuff. But one of her mentors was Amiri Baraka. And she was saying that, when she went to Howard and, they would have protests and stuff to this nature, that, she would get information from him. Like, when you're doing this, don't do this in the federal, building. So make sure there's no mail room or something like this, like, and she said that like they will kill you. Like, you got to expect to die when you're doing, this other kind of stuff. Like, I don't see that enough, that kind of mentoring and that kind of expectation. So when they come into these classrooms, they get a true sense, and it's not like it's something that was way back then, because that seems to be the sense.
Let me tell you this. My work around political prisoners has allowed me to actually bring former political prisoners into my classes that I teach right now. Baba Sekou Odinga, former political prisoner, key organizer with the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition, has been in my classes at Baruch College. Ochiri Latulu, locked up 28 years in Trenton State Correctional. He's been in my classes as well. Again, going back to Greg Carr, he has this beautiful lecture where he says we need to remember that these folks who took on the government, they are still living. And we need to have our children be sitting at the feet of these folks. And one of the things that I try to do is to bring those folks into the class so that this is not a distant memory. This is not something that's far in the past. These people are still living, and these people are still committed to doing the work to get us out of the situation that we're in. And so like the political prisoner work for me is so important because, number one, we still got people who are locked down. All right. Number two, we've got people who've been released and they are still alive and trying to do this work. And folks need to know. People think, Panthers, Black Liberation Army, as if it's something way far back in the past, and it's not. It's not.
Yeah, Dr. Greg Carr always puts it in the context of what he calls genealogy, and having that mouth to ear experience. That's that's why one of the reasons why I named this particular segment the Mbongi, because that's where, like, when Fukuyama talks about where young people get to learn how the politics are done, like they're required to come to the Mbongi and sit and at the feet of these elders, and they can actually ask questions and stuff to this nature. But that mouth to ear experience, there's not enough of that in our community, and it can make it seem so far and distant.
I've talked to some former political prisoners, and they've told me that everything that happened ain't gonna be found in a book.
Yeah.
And these people ain't even willing to write it down in a book. But it can happen in conversation. And that's why the conversations are so important. We just need this. The first time that I met Baba Sekou Odinga, the first thing that I said was, thank you for your service. Thank you for the sacrifice. And then build a conversation from there. And that's what we need to be thinking about as it relates to these former political prisoners who are out and still committed to the struggle. That's what drives me. There's a really beautiful book entitled "The War Before: The True Life of Safia Bukhari," and it goes through her life, her relationship with the Panthers, with the Black Liberation Army, and her commitment to not forgetting about her brothers and those sisters who were locked down. Your viewers should go check out the Jericho movement. Your viewers should go check out the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition. These are all organizations that are committed to focusing on bringing attention to the work of former political prisoners and current political prisoners. The number one political prisoner that is of most concern to me is Sundiata Acoli. And for the majority of folks, when you say Sundiata Acoli, it's crickets. But if you mention the name Assata Shakur, everybody would know Assata. But there is Assata Shakur, there is Sundiata Acoli, and there is Zaid Malik, who were all in that car on the New Jersey Turnpike. Zaid was murdered by the state. Okay? Sundiata escaped for a minute and then got captured, and he's now locked up. Okay? In Cumberland Correctional Facility in Maryland. And we need to be concerned with his health, and we need to be concerned with getting him free. And we need to be mindful of these folks who made sacrifices for the freedoms that we have right now. And that's the thing that kind of drives me. Baba Sekou will always say that, we need to be mindful that we could be the next political prisoner. And we want to have people fighting for us.
Yeah. We don't have that much time with you left, but I want to talk lastly, kind of shift gears on the work of Cheikh Anta Diop and how he has influenced, your way of thinking, your approach to studying, African people, the whole gamut.
Again, Diop Diop is foundational to the work that I did coming out of Temple. My dissertation looked at the two cradle theory and tried to understand how the ideas of the two cradle theory has impacted the development of theories and concepts within Black studies. The two cradle theory pretty much argues. Do I need to explain it?
Yeah. Well, I have a mixed audience,
okay,
so
I'm gonna give you the elevator version of the two cradle theory. Two cradle theory pretty much argues that environmental conditions impact the way in which people exist within the world and how they actually see the world. So, and this is a geohistorical narrative that informed the majority of what Diop was doing. And this is the thing that like I love about Diop's work. Like, you know, the majority of people who know Diop in relation to Kemet. Yeah. But it's like the majority of the work that Diop did in order to be clear on that Kemet was an African civilization comes directly out of the two cradle theory. So for me, I'm concerned with Diop and the two cradle theory. I'm concerned with trying to understand how environmental conditions impact the way people see their relationship to the earth, see their relationship to family and others. So when we started, we were talking about, oh, there's these different worldview systems. Well, according to Kobe Cambone, according to some other African psychologists, the very basis of explaining worldview systems is connected to the arguments made by Cheikh Anta Diop. This conflictual, individualistic approach to reality is reflective of the geohistorical development of European peoples who were struggling to survive, and they were only concerned with themselves and weren't thinking about no one else. And the reason why African people can be so concerned with others and can be so concerned with community is because they had the ability to do that, because they were not in conflict with their environment. And that's the very basis of the two cradle theory in a nutshell. And that those ideas, I still teach them. I still use them as a point of reference because they are helpful in thinking about the moment that we are in. So if you want to talk about racism, I make the argument that racism, number one, comes directly out of the mind of a European, comes directly out of the experience of a European, because it's rooted in, number one, separation, number two, hierarchy, and number three, conflict, okay? You can look at the work of Marimba Ani when she lays out that European Utamawazo, that European conceptual frame of reference. And you can use that to explain racism, sexism, all those isms that develop out of a European conception of reality are connected to the geohistorical development of European peoples that has become normalized within their culture. So we think that it is normal and natural for people to be in conflict. There's nothing normal and natural about people being in conflict. It's just that there's one way of seeing the world that's masquerading as the universal.
Indeed. And the concern I have with people with Diop is that they don't look at him as a stepping stone to advance the work. Mm-hmm. They rather rest on his theories, and that's not what he called for. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't really mention about him is his call to scrutinize his thoughts and theories and to advance the work, especially in terms of research teams. But I'm sorry.
No, I was going to follow it up. Diop was very clear. He said that we need research teams on the continent and the diaspora to continue this work. But even in the call for that, I don't even think that I believe that the work around the two cradle theory, there's more that needs to get done.
Yeah, I've used that as a foundation, but I've had to alter some things of Diop there. It's still within the context of the environment shaping, the behaviors, but there's a sub context dealing with mode of production. Okay. And so a lot of that stuff that he was talking about, it kind of oversimplifies it in a sense, because like there's this clear line, even though he has three really, the confluent zone, the kind of upper and lower tier of the northern and southern cradle. Right. But a lot of that stuff is, we could talk about European, but we can also talk about the Semitic folks, because you got to understand, like, even in the biblical tradition, this is where kind of your first written forms of racism exist. This idea of a chosen people, You know, everybody else is Gentiles, and then, you know, they're not one of us. And people getting even punished for marrying, you know, and saying other. They've institutionalized othering, but that falls within his southern credo, because he even considers Arabia as Northeast Africa. But it's more so like that kind of ideology. He's right with the nomadism, but more so, this is what I add, is more so specifically the nomadism connected to pastoralism. And and because this lifestyle forces you to be that way. And so like you'll read a lot of literature on what they call the something of honor. You know, it's an honor code that comes out of the pastoralist tradition. So when they're talking about, you know, like all the violence, you know, from the United States to Britain and all of this, they all trace it, just like Diop, but not mentioning Diop, to these nomadic tribes, you know, who originate in kind of central, you know, Europe was really Asia, but you know, and that kind of central, you know, saying Asia, which we call the Caucasus steppes and all of this other kind of stuff. But they more narrow it down to the nomadic pastoralism tradition, because you have to be a warrior 24/7 to protect not only your cattle from the natural predators, but it's a tradition in these types of societies to raid other groups for their cattle, because cattle is the center of wealth for these folks. So now you building up a tradition where there's not trust for others, because they may be coming to invade and steal your cattle. And then of course the younger folks, the younger and stronger warrior king, is the one who is revered more, and not the elder who is seen as weak. Unlike in the traditional, you know, sedentary African traditions, where the elder is seen as, you know, more powerful because of wisdom and experience. And so, but that's a, you know, another conversation. But on Diop, I think one of the less talked about books, than the one that I think, like, all of that work was geared towards, is Black Africa, a economic and cultural basis for a federated state. And you know, that's where people kind of, you know, everybody, like you said, is stuck on the Egypt stuff, and the Egyptians were Black, but people don't see that other conversation that he has, where he's trying to link all these African people culturally using the sciences, so that they have a basis to create a United States of Africa. So he's talking politics and economics and stuff to that nature. And that's a conversation that isn't discussed as much when in regards to Diop.
Indeed. I mean, I tell folks all the time, Diop was multifaceted. Diop was extremely complex. Diop was not just a scholar. He was a politician. He was an activist. He was incarcerated for his politics. We can label Diop a political prisoner if we wanted to, okay? You know, but it's part of, and I would argue that part of our, like, you know, hype over Diop and Kemet is like connected to trying to find a potential center, but we have to realize the complexity of these folks, and we need to study them in their entirety as opposed to just one component of their work.
Indeed, indeed. You've rocked with us for about an hour and some change, and I know you've had a long, busy day. And so, you know, I appreciate you taking the time again to share your insights. I just wanted to, you know, give my audience a snippet of some of the areas of interest of you or whatnot. And again, I'm always committed to, because I can lecture and talk all day, but y'all got to understand the community in which I belong to, where these voices in these subjects and stuff are being talked about all the time. And so I want to bring these conversations to y'all who may not be privileged to follow these individuals, to be introduced to their work and things of that nature. So I appreciate you again for coming on and sharing your insights, and we'll have to have you on in the future so we can narrow down the topic and let you get busy, as we say.
I want to thank you, say Asante Sana, and appreciate the ability to talk with a brother who does some important work. And you're gonna need to give me a citation on that piece that you were just talking about, so that I can kind of retool my stuff around Diop, because it's important and it's necessary. But these spaces are important and necessary for folks who are not within the schools that some of us are teaching at. If Black Studies is about bringing the campus to the community, this is a venue that is accessible to the community. So this becomes an important space for us to have these conversations and do this work. So again, I thank you, and I thank your viewers for allowing me to share a little bit.
Appreciate it. So where can for those who aren't in New York and can't take your class directly with you, but they just want to probably ask you some questions, or get some bibliographic work from you, how can they get in contact with you?
My email is there a place I could type it up? Or
you can type it and I'll put it up. So
in the private chat?
In the private chat, yeah.
Right.
And I'll make a banner.
So my email is coming up right now, but I will also say that y'all can catch me on Twitter, because a lot of the ideas and stuff that I teach about are connected to a lot of the stuff that I post and talk about on Twitter. So there's my email there. My Twitter is at the Karanja Keita as well. I welcome emails. I welcome discussion. I do not do a lot of public discussion on Twitter. We can talk in the DMs, but yeah, I'm always open, and it's necessary. This stuff needs to continue, and we need to continue to explore these ideas.
Indeed. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you on Thursday and Friday and Sunday of this week with some more content and interviews with some very dynamic African people. And so y'all be safe out there, continue in your studies. And if y'all have any questions, again, the email has been given, or leave a comment in the comment section. Please like and share, and keep these conversations going. And, with that said, y'all have a good night. And here is my contact information. As always, there we go. So you can hit me up on the website, and then social media, of course. And with that said, we are out. Y'all be blessed.
Peace.